What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free for behind the scenes stuff, arm yourselves, typology stuff. A little less formal and info focused this time because I haven't dealt with or come to understand ESTPs enough to despise them. So while we're still in this ignorant positivity mode, I'm going to enjoy a spot of simping while I still can. Most of my favorite people are ESTPs, and it has nothing to do with this ESTP stereotype. I think the cool but shallow action person stereotype gets them very wrong. I'm realizing I view them more as field lawyers for shit I care about. For some reason, I think people boil ESTPs down to SE at an insultingly exaggerated level. Now, they are wacky, but wackiness isn't their core. Wackiness is their tool. A common theme I've noticed with ESTPs is two of their big concerns in life are shit doesn't make sense and people aren't what they say they are. Which, as an INTP, is my bread and butter, but I'm dealing with it from the NESI perspective, which is this cloudy conspiratorial level, whereas they're dealing with it on the ground level. They're on the streets mildly uncomfortable, mildly suspicious, like they're living out they live in real time. Which is one of the reasons I think acute depression is a key element of ESTPs, even if they aren't feeling it all the time. As an INTP, that is your general mode, which isn't fun, but thinking about functions materially, NE and SI are like a spider web. And when you deal with and understand something enough, while a web can hold you in place and keep you down, it can also keep you up. So you're probably not going to feel as many highs, but you're also not going to feel as many of those severe lows. And when you do get that low, you're still operating within that depression web. Now, allegedly, ESTPs are, on average, one of the happier types, but I question that. They might experience more highs and be able to ride them longer, but in my experience, ESTPs are defined more by their lows, even if those lows for most ESTPs are infrequent. They don't need to be frequent. And this goes for most NI types, but it's especially prominent in NI inferiors. ESFPs operate similarly. An NI inferior can't hit rock bottom. There isn't a bottom low enough for them to hit. And unlike with NESI types, they don't have that web, that protective web. And unlike higher NI types, DOMs or auxiliaries, they don't have that NI fighter pilot internal maneuverability to fly back out. And even with NI tertiaries, ISTPs and ISFPs, they don't hit. So ISTPs and ISFPs seem like they don't hit rock bottom quotes either exactly. It's more like they go really low and then they find a holding pattern of misery. They could go lower, and sometimes they do, but usually they don't. NI inferiors will fall so far and so long they'll starve to death before they can even think of hitting some theoretical bottom. And I think that's what gives, to me, ESTPs that appealing, relatable flavor. Each type's inferior function is like a garnish. It's not a lot, but it's everything. So with ESTPs, even when they're in upbeat mode, they're defined by this depression or this anxiety. Even if they aren't feeling it right now, there's an awareness of it they can't get away from. They aren't sure what's going to happen a month from now, but they live with the certainty of what could happen. And what could happen is annihilation. And that gives them that appealing, sad flavor and that relatable touchiness. And ESTPs are very touchy. And where most touchiness or sorts of touchiness are annoying, even though I'm sure in their own ways to somebody they are relatable and appealing, ESTP touchiness appeals to me because you get it. Not exactly, but you understand the components, particularly in the field of, or fields of TI and FE. Great saying I got from an ENTJ: love is seeing your values lived in another person. And I think that's why ESTPs appeal to me. With that dominant SE, you are watching literally your values lived in another person. They'll process and react to things differently, but your core judging concerns are the same. What the tribe says is correct versus what is actually correct, even if what you think is actually correct is not correct, are very different things. And where an INTP will step even further back to try to figure it all out, an ESTP will step in and shake people to figure it out. And this is different from an ENTP because, in my view, an ENTP will step over, not into. You ever watch Ghost? The way the ghosts, the dead spirits, can affect things in the world of the living? ENTPs will do that a lot, but they won't step into the world of the living. They'll just kick up a fuss to try to get people in this other plane to react so they can figure it out, or figure everything out from their vantage. Which is fine, that's interesting, that's useful even. And this isn't to say ENTPs will never directly put themselves in harm's way, they will, but there's always that familiar any disconnect. You aren't engaging them as people. You're engaging them on an abstract level as carriers of ideas. Whereas an ESTP will step in and shake the shit out of Joe Dipshit to figure out whether or not he's a reptile. And I think one of the concerns is realizing average Joe Dipshit is a reptile. Or if he isn't, then he's not you, and what most people are is not you. And if that's the case, then what are you? What does that say about you? What does that mean? And I actually think They Live is the perfect example. For INTPs and ENTPs, the matrix is the model for what we're talking about here. For ESTPs and maybe ISTPs, but ISTPs are a little odd. We'll need to think about them a little bit more. They Live is the example, the model for what this is. This human disconnect. And I think one of the reasons this is prevalent in this type is, statistically speaking, ESTPs are not as common as you'd think they'd be. Now, we don't normally focus on statistics on this channel. We are quiet fans of SJs around here. But the disparity between even an ISTP and an ESTP is stark in terms of population. And that puts ESTPs in a weird spot in society. Cognitively speaking, you exist to engage people eye to eye. And whatever it is you see on that TI-FE level doesn't line up, doesn't make sense, is probably a bit unnerving. When you find yourself in these situations, you can't help but think about it. And then you get into ESTP alienation, which is where or when the weirdest shit starts happening. I'm fascinated by two ESTPs, Ernest Hemingway and Benito Mussolini. And I'm fascinated with them because they're basically the same person, but once they hit this mode, they couldn't be more different. And Hemingway communist, hated Mussolini, fascist, and I think it's because they're so similar. And this dynamic duo has become my DNA interwoven strands model for why I like ESTPs now, until I learn more about them and hate them thoroughly. Let me enjoy this while I have it. Both were journalists. And if we're going with models or archetypes, I think journalist is the archetype in my mind that best defines ESTPs. Because people frame SE as this function that goes out into the world with a baseball bat and smashes things, and there is an element of that, but there's also an analyzing aspect to SE that goes aggravatingly overlooked, not just in the SETI types, but also in the SEFI types. SE will stare at something, and unlike with NE and SI, with which or within which you look at something and then you're attaching all these data points together and you're trying to fit this into something else, it's this big cloud of static and activity. SE doesn't do that. It will look at something and just look at something and absorb it totally on a level NE and SI can't. And I think that that's part of what contributes to what we would call it NI paranoia. It's probably even more SE paranoia, because if you've absorbed something totally and you don't like it, or it's bad, or it doesn't make sense, then it's inescapable because that's what you've absorbed. This is, at least for now, the thing and the whole thing. Which is why I think journalism fits. It is getting the words right, to borrow a phrase from Hemingway. Getting the details down exactly. But then you step into that next stage, that commentary stage, that what do you think about it stage, and most importantly, what do you do about it stage. Hemingway said, fuck it, I'm gonna be sad and kill fascists. Mussolini said, fuck it, I'm gonna be sad and kill socialists. And quick, delicious Hemingway tangent before I forget. Later in Hemingway's life, I think it was after one of his suicide attempts, he tried to commit suicide again by walking into a plane's blades because he was convinced the FBI was following him, and everybody thought he was crazy, but then much later it turns out, yes, the FBI was following him, and it was because he was suspected of being a communist, which he was. So, yes, if you're an SE type and you're paranoid, you're probably right to be paranoid. Hemingway was right. He tried to kill himself to escape the glow-in-the-dark FBI investigators, and he couldn't pull it off until later. Anyway, this is the point the engagement with society for ESTPs gets interesting. Once they've confirmed, like dryads connected with nature, something is fundamentally wrong with this species. It's again twisted like DNA, or like vines twisting together. The wonderful contradictions. There is a contempt for one part of human nature, and a deep love for another part of it, and an inability ever to separate them totally, which leads to implosion or dictatorship. Hemingway found the sad beauty in shared suffering and tried to unite people on it, but failed both in society at large and in his work, which in his work he was commenting on the failures not just of his effect on society but everybody's, of getting people to acknowledge the things or the feelings and experiences, the sufferings we all share and unite on them, failing to do that and then destroying each other over them instead. Almost all of Hemingway's works involve that on some level. If we could acknowledge that we all hurt in the same ways, we wouldn't need to hurt each other. But for some reason, that's never going to happen, and that's the greatest pain. Now, I haven't studied Mussolini as much, but I'm working on it. I think Mussolini felt the same way. And that's why initially Hitler's anti Semitism didn't really strike him. He's feeling the same disconnect Hemingway is, but race isn't the issue. It's something else. Now, Mussolini answered with futurism or black shirt Italianism. I'm not allowed to say the word. It's an ism that has to do with national concerns. But people comment frequently on how fluid Mussolini's fascism is. And many condemn that fluidity as two-facedness, as insubstantiality, as a concern with power more than with any value or ethic. But I think it's the complete opposite. Just in that fucked up ESTP way, that TIFE way. The fluidity and the changes come not from, or not solely from power, that is part of it, but more from trying to wrangle something fluid, something protean, something that does not want to be wrangled. And that ultimate prize is whatever it is that is going to get people on the same page, get them to treat each other decently, and have something to believe in. I think it's just a consequence of what TI and FE are, and the modernist times at their freshest, that pursuit of that one thing ended up being nothing in particular. Hemingway killed himself over it, Mussolini got killed over it. It's sad, and I think it's a paradox most high-level ESTPs grapple with daily. But not just grappling with it the way other types would, like an INTP would, from a distance, dourly taking notes and shaking a head. ESTPs are in the trenches with it. They know it intimately, and they can't get away from it. While we're simping, let's mention the fact we simp for Blood Diamond. Sometimes I wonder, will God ever forgive us for what we've done to each other? I think ESTPs are cool because they deal with the questions I ask as closely as a human being can. And I think I like them also because they're consumed by these paradoxes. Neither Hemingway nor Mussolini was a good person. Neither will be forgiven for what they've done to people. It's poetry in motion, it's just wonderful. Okay, I think we'll cut it here because that should capture just about everything. I am not looking forward to learning to hate ESTPs at some point. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.